Alright, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PLAYERSTOO.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that really helps us out. It is a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, that helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. All right, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
It's going very well, Mark. How are you getting on yourself?
Not bad. I'm doing a bit of decorating
in
my gaming / podcast studio.
Your man cave. Your terrible man cave.
My terrible man cave. I'm slightly concerned that it will be more echoey than usual on the recording. So, ladies and gentlemen, if that is true, I do apologise. I did try and do a sound test and it didn't sound too bad, so hopefully it's all good. But Lewis, what have you been playing this week?
I have just been playing more Nier Automata this week, really. Put a good spurt in. I've now completed my first playthrough, the A playthrough, the 2B playthrough, I suppose.
Nice one, man.
Yeah, that was great. The last few hours were really fun. The story went haywire. The boss battles were pretty epic. I did hit one kind of difficulty spike that I wasn't expecting, just one boss in particular that I found really difficult, and in the process of very nearly killing it but then dying to it, I used all of my healing items, and there was no ability to go to a shop before you retry it, and so that became a bit of a nightmare, but I managed to push through. Basically, I think that was putting the old Elden Ring skills into action and just getting my dodge timing down to excellence. So yeah, did that, and then got this fantastic, unexpected message from Square Enix at the end of the game. Like, it's an actual message from Square Enix that pops up to say, like, this isn't the end of the game. There's more. Please, like, play along further to experience the rest of the story, which was kind of oddly immersion breaking, obviously, but I just was like, they didn't bother trying to kind of wrap it up in the narrative or the lore or whatever. They were just kind of like, do not miss the important message that this game is not finished. which was really good. So I'm about halfway through my B playthrough. So for anyone who doesn't know, you basically play the game again, the game that you've experienced thus far again as your companion character 9S. But I'm starting to see small variations on that already, not so much in the action as such, but there's like little cutscene flourishes that haven't been there in their initial run. So I'm assuming at this point these are things that 9S understands, because he's like a scanner or like a recon bot more so than a combat bot, which 2B is.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not really unraveled exactly what's going on there yet. And there's a very small but quite important change to the gameplay, I suppose, which is that instead of dual wielding weapons and being kind of as powerful and as fast as 2B is, you now have this hacking mechanic. I don't really like the hacking, I've got to say. Like, it's not, it's kind of just like a really short bullet hell moment that you have to just kind of shoot these black spheres and sometimes some other things around them. It's okay, but it gets tiresome pretty quickly, and like I kind of wish I could just get through it faster, because as I say, I've played all of this already. But yeah, really enjoying it. I expect to be finished reasonably soon if I can get another decent stint in like I had this week. I should get through the second playthrough, and then the third one is different. I am told I don't know what to expect from that.
That is indeed.
But then it all kind of wraps up. So yeah, it's fantastic. Honestly, if anyone's been thinking about playing this and just wants, like, I find it really just good fun, chill to play. Like, it's not taxing at all. Story wise, it's complicated obviously, but it's not, you don't really have to engage that deeply with that at the time. You can kind of let that sink in the background, but moment to moment gameplay is just a blast, and I'm really enjoying that about it. It is uncomplicated, it is not overly challenging, it's kind of everything I wanted in the wake of what had been a really intense game beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what has happened here, Lewis, is that Elden Ring has just ruined us for all other video games.
Yeah. It's certainly, like, I have thought multiple times playing this, like, I have gone into a play session fearing, like, oh, I'm going to be stressed, I'm going to be tired, am I really in the headspace for this? And then as I'm playing it, it's like, it's literally hold R1 and slap square. Like, there's very little else to think about in the moment-to-moment action here. And that might sound dismissive, but it is accurate, and that's not actually a bad thing, I don't think. But Elden Ring and I guess before that Bloodborne, have just given me the feeling like, oh god, booting up a game at like 11 o'clock at night, if that's the time that I'm free at, if I'm not quite in the zone, you just shouldn't. And actually, this is a game that you totally should, and you totally can, and it feels fine.
Nice one. That is very, very good.
What about you, Mark? What have you been playing?
Well, I've just been continuing my progression through A Plague's Tale: Innocence, which I am also finding surprisingly refreshing, Lewis, I have to say. I'm honestly really enjoying it. I forgot to mention last time that it's set during the 100 Years' War in France. It's a fantastic setting, I've got to say. It's just completely unique to anything I think I've experienced in a video game. It's just a completely different culture, I suppose, to what you're used to playing in video games, or at least I am. I think in a lot of ways that it feels like an old school video game, and that is not an insult. I think it just comes along with it being on the sort of AA scale, but it really does remind me of a much simpler time in video games. Like, there's not 1,000 quests, there's not 1,000 collectibles, it's not bloated in any way. It's just doing one thing and doing one thing like pretty fucking well.
Yeah, good.
And that is all I really want from a video game 99% of the time, do you know what I mean? While it is quite tense and everything is based around the stealth, although some of the more aggressive mechanics, I suppose, like are sort of kicking in a little bit, so there is slightly more combat than in the early game. It is actually quite a relief to be playing something not massive and not full of decision making or something like that, just something that is quite straightforward. I mean, although it is a relatively tense experience, or it can be a tense experience, a lot of the time it's not, but it can be a tense experience. Like, the game is literally just get from A to B and progress the story, and that's just quite nice, I feel.
Yeah, definitely agree with the idea that simple games or straightforward games that are just doing one thing well should really get a bit more praise than they do. I think, not that this game hasn't been, but here's us both playing games that just have like good, simple gameplay mechanics at their heart, and then tell interesting stories around them. I mean, we've talked a lot about decision making in games and how it's generally a bit rubbish, or quite often quite badly executed.
Yeah, I just think it's massively overrated sometimes. Do you know what I mean? It's not that it can't be done well, it's just that quite often it isn't.
Yeah, and so just take that out and make your game interesting and tell the story that you want to tell. I think that's something to be said for that, definitely.
Definitely, Lewis, definitely. All right, Lewis, I think it is time for the news. All right, Lewis, news item number 1. There has been a huge GTA 6 leak. This has been absolutely all over the news, including the mainstream news. Over 90 videos and over an hour of footage seems to have leaked, making it one of the biggest leaks in video game history, and I think the fact that it is GTA has only amplified things here. I must admit, I've not seen a huge amount of the leaked footage. It's basically just the things that I've stumbled across on Twitter, mostly because I've not seeked it out, and the reason that I've not really seeked it out is because I really don't think that this style of leak really has much use to us as a consumer. Like, this is very, very early development footage. This game is very likely not going to come out for another 2 years, meaning that anything that anyone is looking at right now has a very small percentage chance of actually making it into the game, And to be honest with you, now I probably won't have much of a chance to look at it, because Rockstar is handing out takedown notices hither and yon, Lewis. This also hasn't originated from a normal insider leak that we are used to. This basically has been the result of a hacked internal Slack channel. The person responsible for this also claims to have source code for GTA 5 and 6 and is threatening to publish both in full. They also claim to have a test build of a game. It is unknown what game that is. They have also said that they want to negotiate a deal, quotes, with Rockstar. So, for avoidance of any doubt, this is fucking extortion and highly, highly, highly illegal. But let's circle back to that point in a second. Rockstar have now commented on the leak, making this statement.
We recently suffered a network intrusion in which an unauthorised third party illegally accessed and downloaded confidential information from our systems, including early development footage for the next Grand Theft Auto. At this time, we do not anticipate any disruption to our live game services nor any long-term effect on the development of our ongoing projects. We're extremely disappointed to have any details of our next game shared with you all in this way. Our work on the next Grand Theft Auto game will continue as planned, and we remain as committed as ever to delivering an experience to you, our players, that truly exceeds your expectations. We will update everyone again soon, and of course, we'll properly introduce you to this next game when it is ready. We want to thank everyone for their ongoing support through this situation, the Rockstar Games team.
So, from a purely gaming point of view, what have we actually learned from this leak? Not a lot as far as I'm concerned. Basically, all we've learned is that the previous leak was correct. The game looks as if it's about 2 years away. It looks as if we're going to have both a male and a female protagonist, and it looks as if it's going to be set in a revamped Vice City, all of which I think is pretty cool. I like that it's going to be set in Vice City. That was a totally awesome setting. I like this Bonnie and Clyde thing that they've got going on with these two characters. However, the means by which we have got this information is not great, Lewis. And in fact, Uber, who have also been previously hacked via an internal Slack channel, have apparently been in contact with the FBI and the US Department of Justice around the GTA leak because they believe that it is the same person or the same group of people. So this is no fucking joke. Like, this is a bad hack that's happened here, and these people are trying to extort Rockstar for money, and God knows if they'll be successful in that. Lewis, lot to unpack here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, very dramatic few days on the old gaming Twitter.
Very dramatic.
This totally exploded, as you can imagine. And yeah, I did notice as well that it's appeared on mainstream news, BBC News, when they, could talk about anything else after the last few days. But yeah, this is massive and also nothing at the same time. Like you say, this is...
For us as the consumer, I don't think that this is actually that big a deal, as you said. But for Rockstar, this is huge.
Yeah, it's massive in certain senses. But yeah, for like looking at it from that perspective first, like as gamers, what have we learned? What have we even seen that's of any interest if people have seen any of the footage? I'm much the same as you. I've just like seen the odd wee snippet on Twitter. I didn't really look into it too much because, as expected, there's nothing to be gained from this. You're looking at development footage, potentially even old development footage. I saw one suggestion that it couldn't be more than a year ago that the footage was actually from, but that I don't know if that's true, so don't quote me on that. So, we have no real validity on when the footage is, how far along it is. It is obviously miles out, and the notion that like this represents a final game is obviously absurd because it's like a stolen series of videos from a Slack channel. It's not a game. So yeah, from all of that perspective, we've not learned anything. I suppose the difference here, though, is that people like you and I and our listeners were aware of the reporting on kind of previous internal leaks that gave away that it was going to be Vice City and it was going to be two characters and a female protagonist and all that sort of stuff. But for a lot of people who will have encountered this leak, they won't have been aware of any of that potentially, because if you're not following all of this stuff closely, you might not know. So that it does mean that a lot of Rockstar's like internal stuff is being exposed to an audience before they'd want it to be. Significantly for them, if code has leaked and could be sold, that could be a more substantial problem. But their statement is pretty robustly like, nothing's going to change here. We're just going to continue as we were, and this game will come to you when it's ready. So, it's problematic for Rockstar, and it's obviously, potentially problematic for other big companies, because like you say, if Uber and various others have been hit, then there's kind of no reason to think that anyone's safe if there's a kind of pretty well-organised crime syndicate out there stealing stuff from major tech companies. Then, that needs to be looked at. Sounds like the FBI are on it. So
yeah, I mean, this is, if it's the group that they were talking about, it is no joke, and they have hit other big tech companies as well, including Microsoft recently, I think, and other big ones. Yeah, it's mental. It's really mental that after attacking Uber and Microsoft and big tech companies, the next thought was, let's get GTA 6 out there.
Yeah. Well, you wonder if it's just people on the internet demanding a thing so much that someone's like, well, there's a market here for this if I can get a hold of it, But yeah, obviously don't engage with the leaks if you can help it. Don't further that cause, but I don't imagine they're going to be looking to sell to any normal person.
No, if you can afford to buy what they are probably asking for, you're not a normal person listening to this podcast anyway. You're Rockstar or Take-Two, I'd imagine. Yeah, as you said, Liz, I basically agree. I really don't think that there's anything to be gained here as a consumer. I mean, honestly, like, the stuff's out there now. If you want to go and look at it, go and look at it. But just know that it's not indicative of anything, really. It won't be in the final game, more than likely. Game development is so volatile that 1,000 things could change between now and in 2 years' time, which is only their target date. Do you know what I mean? Like, it could easily be longer than that as well. It's just like, take it for what it is. It is a group of absolute fucking bastards trying to extort money out of Rockstar and have subsequently made this available to all of us to prove their might or whatever it is. But in terms of how useful this is, it's not at all, to be honest. Alright, let's news item number 2. It has been rumoured that the PlayStation 5 is heading for a significant redesign in 2023. This rumour comes from Tom Henderson, no relation, over at Insider Gaming. who has been right about a lot of leaks recently, I have to say, and this story has now been picked up by The Verge, Eurogamer, Push Square, etc. He has claimed that the redesign will apparently launch sometime in late 2023 when the PlayStation is about 3 years old, and will include a removable hard drive, which I actually think is sort of fascinating, Lewis. It will apparently attach via an additional USB-C port on the back, and will apparently attach in such a manner that it won't ruin the aesthetic of the console, e.g. it's not just going to be a PS5 with a external hard drive hanging off the side of it, you know? It will apparently be sold in a bundle with the PlayStation 5, but also separately, which means you could buy a PlayStation 5 and then upgrade later with a disc drive if that was something that you wanted to do. I think that what we're looking at here, Lewis, is basically the PlayStation 5 Slim. And while I think that they might be planning a model like that round about this time, maybe it's a little bit early compared to previous generations, PlayStation have obviously been struggling with supply issues as well, and I think them moving to only manufacturing one unit with an external disk drive that is optional versus 2 units being the disc and the diskless version that we currently have is probably aimed specifically at helping that as well, because right now PlayStation are not selling as many PlayStation 5s as they could be, and on the spreadsheets and the investor people will all be saying, well, we need to do something about that, and I think that this is probably a solution to that, you know?
Yeah, potentially. I keep coming back and forward with this story, to be honest. When I first heard it, I just thought, what is the kind of point of this exactly? Because both a version with a disk drive and a version without a disk drive already exist. So adding another SKU that is sort of a grey area between the two, where you can add one or you can have it without, not really sure what's gained from that. Then I suppose, you know, having that additional option is good, and if they can focus on essentially making one model, then great. But that also would sort of suggest that the component issues that they're having are about the connection of a disk drive to the rest of the console, which I don't really think is the case, right? So like separating them doesn't necessarily make building the base PS5 unit, the digital edition, I suppose, any quicker necessarily or any easier.
I think that you would have to make separate, well, you would need to make separate casings for them both for a kickoff, and that alone would probably be an issue. But then in terms of the internals, I would have thought that you would have had to have made a motherboard basically for the PlayStation 5 with a disc and a motherboard for one without, you know what I mean? So it would be, in my mind anyway, and I mean, I'm speaking from a place of ignorance as well, you know, I'm not trying to get my high horse, but in my head, that is still making 2 things, whereas that will be making one thing. And whether or not it's a massive change to us as a consumer, like in terms of making millions of units of something, like if you can make millions of units of only one thing, that is always going to be easier than making millions of units of 2 things.
Sure, I mean that will be true, but yeah, I guess it just, like, I thought it was kind of just the processor chips that were the problem and not so much like different versions of motherboards or whatever. I still suspect that would make marginal difference, and it sounds like in the short term they would be selling all 3 versions. You know, they're not going to remove the old SKUs, but that remains to be seen. I mean, all of this remains to be seen, obviously, because it's not official. But
the chat was from Tom Henderson that whenever this launches, the others would be getting phased out at that point, but they wouldn't just go away like overnight, as you correctly say. So even beyond late 2023, when this makes an appearance, you probably will still be able to get your hands on an original one with a disc drive or an original one without a disc drive. Well, I was going to say relatively easily, but as easily as it is to get a PlayStation right now, which is not very.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's kind of where I was going with it. Thought that it was a bit meaningless, all this, because all these rumours recently about new hardware from Sony feels like it's trifling at the edges of a bigger problem, which is that they just can't meet demand at all. And so adding extra SKUs or making a new version that's slightly smaller or whatever just seems a bit daft. But like you say, if this can help with that, then fair enough. The other issue though, and like we can go into this at much more depth another time, but I am intrigued to see what this means for the future of disc-based games on PlayStation, because if they came out now and said, we will commit to always making a removable disk drive an option, then fine, because we know we're headed towards a digital future, but it feels a wee bit like it could be a test case to see, well, how many people do end up buying that? And if not that many people do, then they might more readily justify getting rid of it altogether, which I don't want to happen.
Well, I don't want that to happen either, but you would have thought they would have already had that data from the current setup, right? Like, if someone wasn't interested in buying discs, then they have an option right now. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think that is a very, very good point, which I intentionally didn't bring up right now because we cannot go into it. But I think that you're totally right. I think that you're totally right on that. I really do. But at the same time, like, I just can't see it right now. I mean, so many people rely on selling like disc-based games. Like, literally, companies would go out of business if they couldn't sell physical copies of games. So it's a whole nuanced question, that, but an interesting one we will come back to another day. All right, Lewis, news item number 3. Speaking of PlayStation hardware, people have finally got their hands on PSVR2. And I know we were talking during our PlayStation State of Play recap last week about how we were unsure about who has actually got their hands on PSVR2. It turned out no one, but we didn't have to wait very long for it to happen, Lewis. I have to say that reports so far seem to be generally pretty positive on PSVR2 from people that have got their hands on it. However, I would take that with a bit of a pinch of salt until we get some proper reviews out there, because this will be a lot of enthusiasts and things like that will have got their hands on it just now. The overwhelming comments say that it is a big, big jump forward from PSVR1 and is much more in line with things like Valve's Index and other VR headsets of that nature, and in some aspects is even better. I still think that the success of PSVR2 will live and die by its price point. And right now, I really think that it's trending to much closer to the Index than to the PSVR1 list, considering the tech that's actually in the headset. And while I'm sure even at that price point, the PSVR2 will probably become the best-selling VR headset of this generation, that price is likely going to be prohibitive to many, many people. And considering the amount of tech that's in the headset, and considering that the price point is going to be prohibitive to a lot of people, and PlayStation will already know that, you would have thought that they would have set it up with every chance for success, Lewis, but in typical PlayStation fashion, it doesn't seem like they are doing that. In what might be the most PlayStation of PlayStation moves, this week it was announced that PSVR1 games will not be backwards compatible with PSVR2. Senior Vice President of Platform Experience, Hideki Nishino, has said this regarding backwards compatibility.
PlayStation VR games are not compatible with PlayStation VR 2, because PlayStation VR 2 is designed to be a truly next-generation virtual reality experience. PlayStation VR 2 has much more advanced features, like an all-new controller with haptic feedback and adaptive triggers, as I've said, an inside-out tracking in it, 3D audio is coming together, 4K HDR of course. So this means that making games for PlayStation VR 2 requires a whole different approach than the original PlayStation VR. These features actually enable developers to create worlds that feel more vivid and alive and bring players closer to the experience than ever. I believe that.
Lewis, that smells to me like a lot of bullshit, if I'm completely honest with you. And in fact, I think that he mentions a lot of reasons why this shouldn't be a problem. And the main excuse that I've seen for this, the lack of backwards compatibility to PSVR 1, is the fact that PSVR 1 used the Move controllers, which, so far as I'm aware, use quite a specific motion control and doesn't work quite the same as the new controllers are going to. But even still, like, you've got to work that out. You've absolutely got to work that out. Like, implement a system like the Steam Deck and say this game might not work exactly as intended on the new PSVR 2, but it'll work good enough and things of that nature. I don't know if you can map the Move controls to a joystick or something. Like, work it out, PlayStation. Do you know what I mean? I think that during console launches, that backwards compatibility is probably one of the most over-cared about aspects on the console, considering how much it's used, right? However, with PSVR 2, is a totally different story. That catalogue is nowhere near as big or as varied as a console's is going to be. And I think that this is a massive misstep, a huge misstep. Lewis, I remember you made a fantastic point about the PlayStation Plus free games and the fact that PSVR games were being added to that pretty regularly. And we both thought that this was a really, really good idea because it would give you a base library for people that wanted to buy PSVR 2. And now that just makes no sense at all. It's just going to be a bunch of games that are just going to be totally useless and totally forgotten about unless they are ported to PSVR 2. And I actually think that it's pretty shitty on the developers who originally supported your very niche product and are now being told that they have to port their games to your new system rather than your new system just being able to work with them like every other VR headset has been able to do apart from this one. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I totally agree. It is ridiculous. This kind of announcement overshadowed everything about the actual responses to hands-on time with the PSVR2 in my mind. You know, I barely saw anyone talking about how it actually plays or how good it looks or how good it feels or any of that stuff. It all came down to this discussion about how kind of absurd this is. And like you say, not only are there kind of issues floating out there about maybe the Move controller being the thing or whatever, what he actually says in this statement are all things that you could apply pretty much precisely, I think, to the difference between PS4 and PS5, and PS4 games play on PS5.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, I get that it could be more complicated with
sure,
a VR headset, but it doesn't matter. Like,
yeah,
work it out.
Exactly.
Make it
like,
work.
If you're going to be developing a product, you know, you have to set your project targets at the start of that, and surely one of them has got to be, this has to be backwards compatible. I mean, not only because it just should be anyway, because all hardware should be in some fashion, you know, selling us things that even months later, I mean, here we are, like Moss 2 just came out on PSVR, and that seemingly won't be playable on PSVR 2, which might be coming like as early as, you know, spring next year. That's not on as far as I'm concerned.
It's not, and considering as well that it's now on them, it's now on the Moss dev team to make the decision to port it or not. Do you know what I mean? And whether or not that's going to be worth it for them. I just don't think that is at all fair on them when they've supported, again, your very niche product. Do you know what I mean? They were one of the earliest devs in on it, or one of the few that were making like really, really interesting games for it. And I just don't think that's fair. That's totally
it's not fair, no. And it just resets the whole thing back to zero, like you said about the library issue here. It just means that you're going to have a couple of years of people working out what they might be able to do with this hardware and how to experiment with it, and a couple of rubbish projects and tech demos and that kind of thing. And by the end of its life cycle, in 4 or 5 years' time, it'll finally be hitting its groove, and then it'll be time to iterate again. Whereas they could have come in and said, you know, here are 25 games, here are 40 games, here's a PS Plus collection of games just for VR, try them out, buy the new thing, and you'll see what the difference is. Just like they did do with the PS5, you know, it was like, buy a PS5 game to see everything it can do, but don't worry, you can still play the games that you already had.
Yeah, I think that this decision is absolutely absurd. Terrible decision. I think that it's really shot PSVR2 in the foot, which I was sort of weirdly excited about. I sort of still do like that PlayStation support VR in the way that they do. But yeah, this is just a stupid bad decision. And considering the price point I think that this is going to be, which is going to be very expensive, I don't know how you justify that in this world right now where we're in the worst cost of living crisis ever, and you have a product that is going to be badly supported for at least a couple of years, I would suspect, and you can't play games that you previously knew were good on VR on them. I mean, you can't even go, oh, we'll get the new hardware to play something you were excited about, like, I don't know, one of the Resident Evil games in VR or whatever. Like, you can't do that unless they choose to port it, which, I mean, someone like Capcom, maybe that's not that big a deal, but smaller studios, that definitely is. Alright, Lewis, news item number 4. The UK's competition regulator, the CMA, has officially launched an in-depth investigation into the Xbox and Activision deal. Now, I'm not going to recap this whole saga, Lewis, because quite frankly, it would take us forever. But long story short, the CMA have concerns around competition regarding the Activision deal, specifically mentioning that the deal could harm PlayStation's ability to compete if Call of Duty were made an Xbox exclusive. The CMA has apparently offered Microsoft an opportunity to submit proposals to address these concerns, but they have declined to do so at this time. As such, the deal is now being reviewed by an independent panel. It is unclear how long that is likely to take. Interestingly, also this week, the Financial Times has reported that those involved in the deal are also expecting a lengthy review from the EU as well, although I think we all expected that, to be honest. Now, a couple of statements regarding this. Firstly, from the CMA via VGC and from PlayStation via gamesindustry.biz.
So the CMA said, the CMA has referred the anticipated acquisition by Microsoft Corporation of Activision Blizzard Inc. for an in-depth investigation on the basis that, on the information currently available to it, it is or may be the case that this merger may be expected to result in a substantial lessening of competition within a market or markets in the United Kingdom.
Christ, that was a mouthful, that one.
This is business speak, yeah. And then, yeah, this PlayStation statement goes like, by giving Microsoft control of Activision games like Call of Duty, this deal would have major negative implications for gamers and the future of the gaming industry. We want to guarantee PlayStation gamers continue to have the highest quality gaming experience, and we appreciate the CMA's focus on protecting gamers.
Microsoft have also responded saying it makes zero business sense for Microsoft to remove Call of Duty from PlayStation given its market-leading position. I would add, that makes zero business sense yet. If you remember, last time we spoke, Xbox said that they were planning to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation for quote-unquote several more years. But then PlayStation CEO Jim Ryan, laying his cards on the table, said that Xbox have actually only guaranteed that Call of Duty would still be available on PlayStation for 3 years. Lewis, even after all of this, I'm basically expecting this deal to still go through ultimately, but maybe we have underestimated how hard this is going to be for Xbox to push through regulators, and maybe we've underestimated just how much it is going to affect competition.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I can't help but think that this might still just be an act of due diligence, but it is very possible that, you know, Sony have just made enough noise behind the scenes to get people to pay attention to their arguments, because, you know, we know that they've been making these arguments. We know about the statements to the Brazilian regulators as well, where a lot of this kind of the public side of this started to appear. I agree, like, I still think this will go through. I am less and less convinced that it will go through straightforwardly in terms of what we keep coming back to, I suppose, is that this might affect Call of Duty specifically and almost separately from everything else. That still feels like quite an odd thing to me, but I have no idea how common that might be within these kind of mergers and acquisitions processes at all. So yeah, I mean, it's typically as soon as things reach the UK, it all starts to go slow and wrong. That's sort of our gift to the world at the moment. But yeah, Microsoft are going to have to do some work here, I think, to get this over the line, because now that we know as well that what the time frame that they're suggesting actually is from Jim Ryan, that changes everything. You know, 3 years is nothing really in this space, so that's not really guaranteeing anyone anything much.
Well, that is very true, yeah. I was thinking about this and how they might have to treat Call of Duty differently, and I sort of wonder if it's going to be a similar thing to how Alphabet had to come into existence and have Google be like a separate thing, and how Meta have come into existence and have to have Facebook as a separate thing. And closer to home here in the UK, how OpenReach have had to split from BT and be like their own legally separate company, but still owned by the other bigger company. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if doing something like that and saying, well, this company over here will keep that stuff on all platforms or whatever, and then the rest of it just becomes Microsoft. I don't really know if that would make any difference. I was just thinking it's not necessarily unheard of that a smaller company would be spun out of a bigger company just because of the size of that smaller company, like deserves to be its own thing. Yeah, basically,
so almost like Call of Duty becomes its own publisher almost. That'd be an interesting, but all the money still
it just becomes
flows
the
to
Call
Microsoft.
of Duty company or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
Wow.
I don't know if that's even possible. I don't even know if that would solve the problem, to be honest. But yeah, it is a bizarre situation. But ultimately, I think that Call of Duty does have to be treated differently because it is, I mean, arguably the biggest video game series ever. So it'll be interesting to see the fallout from this. We'll leave it at that. Yeah. All right, let's finish off as we always do with a couple of shout outs. Shout out number one, Return to Monkey Island has come out this week. Currently sitting with a very nice 88 on PC and 84 on Switch. It seems like everyone basically likes this game, Lewis. Even some of the less good reviews seem to basically say that the game is well designed. It really brings this style of game into the 21st century. Obviously, this is a beloved old school point and click adventure, so I'm not sure how much nostalgia is playing into some of these reviews, if I'm totally honest with you, Lewis. But ultimately, it seems to be a good game in its own right, and considering the nonsense criticism the game was getting around its art style, I am very, very glad that it was reviewed well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well done to everyone involved for sticking the landing, because it is not easy to take like a very well thought of game franchise back from the dead, essentially, and deliver on that. So, you know, to have got these reviews, well done.
Absolutely. I'm still interested in playing it a little bit, Lewis.
Definitely, yeah.
I don't know if I'm ever going to get around to it, I'll be truthful, but I would like to if I had all the time in the world, Lewis. All right, shout out number two, Metal Hellsinger has also come out this week, currently sitting with a perfectly acceptable, I will say, 79 on Metacritic. It seems like the game is pretty good at what it's trying to be, which is a rhythm-based Doom game, and the music seems to be pretty good if you're into your metal music. However, I think that the problem is that what it's trying to be is actually quite one-dimensional, which was always sort of my problem with the concept. Like, I think that this game would be great fun to have a go of. Do I want to sit down and play this sort of game for hours on end? Like, probably not, really. It seems as though as well, like it might be quite linear, weirdly, as in there is a sort of narrow scope of how you can complete a level. And while Doom is quite rhythmic in how you go through it, part of the fun is that no matter how you choose to play, you can get through it. Do you know what I mean? You're not bogged down and playing with one specific gun or whatever. It's not like that. You can play however you want all of the time, and that's part of the freedom of Doom that really makes it, you know? It's not just about that rhythmic shooting.
Yeah, I guess this is this game's like USP and what sets it apart from Doom, but yeah, had never quite considered that it might almost be like, you know, beat for beat, like you have to be on time. If you miss a shot or miss a target, then you're off the rhythm, and that might be that. But I think the review scores for this are totally fine. This is kind of what I was expecting it to land on.
Yeah, to be clear, I don't think that this is a bad game. And see, to be honest with you, see if you're into Doom and you're into metal, you might really like this, like genuinely. And if you're into rhythm games as well, maybe something to look into.
Exactly, and it's on Game Pass, so there you go.
There you go. There you go. All right, let's shout out number 3. 3 Yakuza games have been announced in less than a week. Or should I be saying the Like a Dragon games, as the series has now officially changed its name in the West to match the Japanese name. Firstly, this all kicked off with Like a Dragon Ishin, which we actually talked about in our recap for the PlayStation State of Play, which is a spin-off of the series which is being brought to the West for the first time. That is a remake. The next game, though, is Like a Dragon Gaiden, the man who erased his name, which is coming in 2023 and is also a spin-off of the series set between Yakuza 6 and 7. This is apparently going to be half the size of a regular Yakuza game and is meant to prepare players for Yakuza 8. And they also announced Yakuza 8 Lewis, which is now called Like a Dragon 8, of course, and is coming in 2024. So a little ways out for Like a Dragon 8, but Sega very clearly are all in this franchise now as a worldwide franchise, not as just something that is for Japan and works a little bit in the West. Like, they are all in this now. And I think a lot of people are really excited about that.
I think they definitely are, yeah. There's a lot of fans of this series, and to get 3 game announcements in quick succession and kind of, setting out the immediate future of this franchise so that if you are kind of new to it, you've got quite a lot to get excited about. I think it's smart, it's quite exciting. The spin-offs and the different time periods and all that are interesting ways to go. Like a Dragon Gaiden, the man who raised his face, Mark, is too long a name for a video game, though.
Oh, I completely agree with that. But it's quite cool that they're doing a sort of Miles Morales of the series. Do you know what I mean? Definitely. I think that's great. I think that's really cool. I think
really
there's space in a lot of series for games like this that are smaller in scope, but interesting and cool and can maybe be their own thing.
Try some stuff out and just like tell a smaller story. Absolutely.
Absolutely, man. All right, let's shout out number 4. EA have announced just a few hours ago that they are going to be making an Iron Man game, Lewis. It is being developed at EA Motive and is being led by the producer of Guardians of the Galaxy, and is apparently going to be the first of several new games made in collaboration with Marvel. I mean, I think that this is the game that EA really wanted to make instead of Anthem, right?
Yeah, it's almost like Anthem was testing something, but how they could have passed that test, I don't know. But yeah, here we are, a new third-person single-player action game from EA, which is interesting to say. That is clearly something that has worked about the Jedi Fallen Order experiment, and they're going to continue doing third-person single-player action games. Great stuff. It will be interesting to see how much of that Anthem tech turns up, and I hadn't even thought about it until you mentioned it. And it could just be a reskin. That would be interesting.
Well, to be fair, the problem with Anthem wasn't the flying mechanics. That wasn't the issue. Like, none of that was the problem. Do you know what I mean? It was everything else around that was the problem.
God, Anthem, eh?
What a thing. All right, and just a final shout out at number 5. Wulong Fallen Dynasty from Team Ninja currently has a limited time demo until September the 26th on Series X and PS5. We here are obviously big fans of demos at PlayerStoo Podcast, and I like that more and more people seem to be coming out with them. You know, I really think that they are a great thing and completely missing from the industry for years. When this podcast comes out, you will still have a few days to jump in. I will try and jump in as well, although it may depend how my decorating is going and whether or not I can get this room back in a working state, Lewis.
Yeah, I meant to jump into it over the weekend actually, and I kind of never got around to it, but I had not realised that it was time limited and how and when that time was limiting, so I will definitely try and check it out over the next few days.
Definitely, man, definitely. All right, Lewis, I think it's time for a beer, and then we'll be back for Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is, do gamers need to understand game development better?
It is indeed, Mark. Yeah, this topic comes off the back of the GTA 6 leak that we were talking about at the top of the show. Obviously, as we kind of referenced there, this story, as you'd expect, went wild on Twitter and was kind of accompanied, as you might expect, and as is, very typical and common of the gaming sphere, I suppose, the gaming Twitter sphere in particular. It came with a lot of bullshit takes and a lot of nonsense and a lot of people kind of fully showing their arse about how little they know about the development process. And just to foreground right at the top,
having bullshit takes lists. How dare you?
How dare it? Yeah. But and this is not to say that we know tons about development or more than other people, but there were some pretty ludicrous perspectives being shared. People saying that the game, if we can even call it that, the prototype of GTA 6 that we have had leaked this week, looks worse than GTA 4. It was going to be a total shambles. There's this one tweet in particular that has kind of now become a bit of a meme in the game development and game journalism kind of spheres. You'll have seen it on Twitter today and over the last kind of 24 hours if you've been on. I'll read it quickly, but I guess I just wanted to say from the start, I was worried that this was going to be a more significant problem of gamers attacking devs and shitting on devs and harassing them, because that did seem to be the energy coming out around this leak. But it has sort of transformed now into a bit more of a pushback and a laugh at this kind of perspective from the community, which is good to see. Self-policing and tell people when they're
it's sort
being
of the nicest way
idiots.
this could have went, to be honest.
But this tweet that you might have seen floating around, and I won't say who it's by or anything, but it went, if you know how game development goes, you'd know that visuals are one of the first things done. This game is 4 years into planning and development. What you see is almost exactly what you will get. The next year is mission coding and debugging, all back-end stuff. It does look ass. And so, just a series of wrong statements.
Yeah, it's not good. To be honest, ladies and gentlemen, see, one of the last things to be finalised is probably all aspects of the visuals.
Yeah, and not only that, but as you were quite rightly saying just off air a minute ago, this tweet kind of betrays a lack of understanding even about how sort of big projects are often delivered and how big development processes, have to move, not in a linear, we go from this part of the process to that part of the process. It's like a lot of people with a lot of different jobs all moving slowly in one direction and kind of coalescing at different points.
Exactly. This will be a team of literally hundreds of people potentially, do you know what I mean? And to think after, what was it he said, 4 years or whatever, everyone just drops everything and okay, time for debugging. It's well, no, it's obviously not how things work, man. All these things develop at the same time. Don't get me wrong, the character models obviously exist for the characters in the game because we've fucking seen them now, but that won't be the final polished version of that character, even if that is what the final character looks like in the slightest. Do you know what I mean? It could totally change for a variety of reasons. Do you know what I mean? It could change for practical reasons in coding, in the mechanics. It could change for story reasons. There's any number of reasons that this could change. This is nowhere near the final product.
Yeah, and particularly by a game like GTA, when there might be even motion capture and stuff still to be done, it's speaking from a position of ignorance. And I guess I want to say straight off that this isn't us shitting on a particular person for not knowing how game development works or any of that sort of stuff, because quite rightly a lot of people don't know. The industry doesn't often give away its secrets, which is maybe something we'll kind of look back to here. But I think in the context of a major leak like this, when developers' work is being shown off in a way that they have no control over and it's not finished and it's not even necessarily up to date, it feels problematic to me that people just launch in with kind of unwieldy opinions like this, and it could potentially do damage to the game, because as we were saying earlier, not everyone who will have encountered this leak will be well versed in kind of gaming knowledge at all. If you've encountered this leak and you're a GTA player and a fan, but you saw it first on BBC News, you might not really have all the context and all the information. Is there an issue here with this kind of information coming out and being met with this kind of wall of nonsense from Twitter, I suppose, or does it not really matter?
I don't think it really matters. Well, I suppose I say that from a position of knowing that this is nothing that will be in the final game, probably. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? I say that from that position. So from my perspective, this doesn't matter in the fucking slightest. As we were saying earlier, obviously this is a huge deal for Rockstar, but us as gamers, I don't really think that there is too much to be gleaned from this, other than what we already knew from previous leaks. Do I think that the video games industry could do with being less secretive? Yes. Categorically, Yes. And I think that there are reasons why it is the way that it is, right? But I think that as the question poses here, like, do we need to educate ourselves a little bit on this? Like, I think it would do no fucking harm, quite frankly, and to get people to understand the process better. And I understand that that's no one's job, like, it's not on any dev to be like, no, this is how things work and whatever. But the introduction of like dev diaries to certain studios and stuff like that as well, like, that sort of give little glimpses here and there. I know some studios are better at that than others. For example, I know that the team that made Celeste, whose name escapes me now, Extremely OK Games, like, had a really deep breakdown of certain aspects of their development and stuff like that, and just like wee tricks that they used within the game. And I just thought all that was great, but at the same time, that even that doesn't really tell the story. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't tell the whole process. It doesn't be like, oh yeah, so this changed, so then we had to do this. And I'm not even saying that it has to be that granular, but yeah, I do ultimately think that if we educate ourselves more, and if there's more just put out there, just the early dev stuff, it's just like, these are the concepts that we're working with. Like, we're, even if it were like we're working with this like Bonnie and Clyde concept right now for GTA, and they flashed up a bit of, I don't know, like, well, we were talking just off air again, like, just about like a bit of concept art or something like that. Do you know what I mean? And like how that translated into an early stage model and whatever. But just be like very clear, like, this is going to develop, this is going to change. I mean, it's called game development. It's not going to. It's about how it starts from somewhere and then it progresses into a finished product. And I don't think anyone that's really criticising this stuff appreciates just how much it can change in a short space of time. Like, vast aspects of this game could be different 2 months from now, 3 months from now. It could be different beyond that again in a big way. And again, that could be driven by any aspect of the development. It doesn't necessarily have to be because of the story thing or whatever. It could just be like there's some practical aspect of programming it one way or programming it another way that means a lot of things have to change, and that is obviously a high level decision someone has to make. But big things change all the time. Like I work in a job where I have worked on like enormously big projects that have involved a lot of people, and shit changes all the time. Shit changes all the time for a massive amount of reasons. Small things change that affect big things, you know what I mean? And to just assume that it's like there's this allotted time to like, oh, this is the time for the visuals, then this is the time for the missions, then it does not work like that. Big projects cannot work like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it's not even necessarily like a problem that causes these changes as well. It can just be...
No, it could be a good idea.
It could be a good idea. It could just be a change in scoping. It could, it could be anything at all. A staffing thing that just means, oh, we'll just cut this thing, or this thing will change slightly. That will happen right up till the last minute. I mean, it's weird when you think about it. Like, we are aware of last minute delays and how often they're talked about being used for polishing up games and stuff. So this idea that a leak like this from an old build, potentially old build of the game, could include anything close to being final, when we know categorically that a game is barely final when it actually hits shelves these days. It's sort of so laughable that people are laughing at it, and quite rightly. But I'm intrigued by this notion of like what the industry could do differently or do more of to try and kind of change this a wee bit. And I think that you're spot on in saying that it's definitely not like individual devs' duties to do this. It shouldn't be part of their already like hectic, busy jobs. And I think that example of Celeste is really interesting, right? Because like dev diaries, I suspect, are one way of doing this, but I imagine a lot of people, including us sometimes, just ignore dev diaries because they're granular. And you don't, like, how often recently have we kind of said, well, we've gone dark on a game because we don't want to know any more about it until it launches, right?
Yeah, I suppose dev diaries are like slightly different because it's less about the actual content of the game and more about like the process of like the actual development of it, which is slightly more interesting. And to be clear, like if Rockstar put out a dev diary, like I'd probably watch that. You know what I mean? Like, but it just tends to come from much smaller teams or like smaller-ish games that I just might not be interested in. Right?
And I think that's kind of the key point I was going to drive towards there, actually, that because you mentioned Celeste, and they obviously were so fantastic throughout their development and post-development at kind of sharing stuff and being really transparent and open about their game, but also that is a small project, and I wonder if like this notion of like what this person's tweeted saying about the visuals being kind of the first thing that gets done. Not that I think that really is the case in indie games either, by the way, but that smaller projects might have more clearly delineated processes like this, whereas when you're talking about something of the scale of Grand Theft Auto 6, I mean, it's not comparable, really. They're going to be just massively different team sizes, massively different economies, and massively different approaches to development. And so I do wonder whether if only just to kind of protect their staff a wee bit online, or to help almost nullify leaks like this where people would look at it and go, yep, but I know that this isn't real, so it doesn't matter. Whether publishers could do something else to kind of get the word out there. And I suppose what I'm thinking particularly about is like, or maybe this could be a future role of like the ESA or like the UKIE over here, any of these kind of like industry support bodies that could just do some work to demystify the development process. I suppose the only ways that that's ever done is from a like, would you want to work in games kind of perspective, and you can probably go and do courses or watch YouTube videos that give you the kind of skills or the tools, but not just a general like, here's how the sausage gets made from start to finish, like not in granular detail, but just like the broad steps. Do you think that would have an impact?
I would hope so. I mean, I'd like to think so. I mean, I can't stress this enough, like, none of this hurts. Do you know what I mean? All of this is good ideas as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, I just think that the more people understand, the less bullshit like this you get. Do you know what I mean? As I said, I was immediately very dismissive of it. Even the stuff that I seen was obviously like working models and stuff like that, you know? It's not final, so like I'm sort of like who cares? Like I don't really care about this massively. Do you know what I mean? But I suppose for people that don't know that this isn't final anything, do you know what I mean? This is very likely to not even be in the final product. Then this suddenly becomes a massive problem for them because they think the next big game is going to be terrible because it looks like whatever. So yeah, maybe in that context, yeah, maybe it does help. Maybe
it's not even just that the consumer is sitting there thinking, oh my god, GTA 6 looks terrible. It's more that they then themselves launch into tirades online and join forums that shit on the game or on any game, you know, because this could happen to anything that's not just GTA, obviously. And that's a pretty hostile environment for developers and publishers to be operating in when there's just like sure. I'm sure there'll be something else that gets them animated anyway, but I think that there's an interest there as well. You know, I was thinking about how content creators like NoClip that do these kind of good deep dive documentaries on games, but they do all tend to be of kind of smaller projects or older projects, and whether like Take-Two could just do a project with a filmmaking team and just say like, this is how we do things. We're not giving away our own secrets here, but like this is generally speaking how a project will move through a studio. Maybe there'd be really obvious downsides to that we're not, or that I'm not considering here at least. I mean, obviously they're not going to want to show off anything that gives them a competitive edge in the market, but
yeah, I mean, you don't want to give away trade secrets. Like that's fine.
That's fair.
Nobody's asking for
that.
I don't give a fuck what your trade secrets are, frankly. But yeah, I mean, I would be quite interested in the process of how your enormous, massive, genre-defining video game gets made. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's quite cool.
Yeah.
And I think that you could do... I mean, PlayStation did a thing like that for God of War, right? They did a sort of documentary style behind-the-scenes look.
Yeah,
I'm not sure... I didn't
end
up watching that, but I'm not sure how much that ended up focusing on, like, the development as opposed to the sort of dramatization of what was basically crunch culture.
Yeah, and the personal stories of it all and stuff,
doing it, yeah, exactly. But yeah, something more focused on the development. Like, again, none of this hurts, but yeah, I think that there is a place for that, and I think that it would be considerably better if we were all, I mean, anyone listening to this podcast, and I very much include myself in this, like if we were all more interested in, or not even more interested, if we were all able to learn more about how video games get made. I just think that just gives us a better appreciation of the process, a better appreciation for the job of devs, and a better understanding of when leaks like this happen, why it doesn't really matter to, well, it doesn't really matter to me because you know, like, this is just early work and stuff, like whatever, you know.
But then potentially also the flip side of when an issue could emerge. So like there was one thing that we were talking about over the last few days about what the significance of the source code leaking would mean, like what could that, and a lot of people were debating the same, like will it lead to delays and that kind of thing, whereas a lot of people are just not going to have any kind of basic knowledge of that stuff. And so
yeah, sure, I mean, obviously, like I was the same as you, like I was immediately wondering, what does that mean? Like I know if the source code leaks, that is very bad. but like the ins and outs of exactly why, like, I mean, I can speculate, I can probably guess, to be honest, but actually knowing and taking an educated guess are not the same thing.
Totally.
And I just think that, like, while a lot of people are video game enthusiasts, a lot of people aren't deep into programming enough to know why that matters.
Yeah, exactly that. And I just think, to round off, like, that point on empathy for devs is kind of the key here. That's kind of why I wanted to have this discussion almost, because I'm not the kind of person who's going to sit here and say, like, we have to defend the right of a publisher to do everything exactly as it wants, and there should never be any information coming out before they're ready to say it, because that's part of the game. But for developers who are putting work into this and then having their work shown off in a way like like, I say shown off, having their work stolen and displayed when it's not finished. Imagine your own half-written speech or your half-written novel or your half-painted painting. Like, you would not want that to come out necessarily unless you chose to present it, right? And there's something there about helping everyone out here in the world understand what that job is actually like. Like, when I read Jason Schreier's books, you saw exactly what development culture could be like and the good sides of it and the bad sides of it. And something like this, again, that just let us in a wee bit more on the technical side to kind of say, like, this is how this goes. These are the types of changes that can happen over a project. This is where this particular game started as a concept, and look at where it ended up when you played it. Like, this is how significantly different these 2 points can be, and here's why. And that in itself, I think, would just be a really educational thing, but also a really fascinating, interesting thing that could hopefully like change fan culture a wee bit, but also maybe, just give everyone a better perspective, maybe lead some more people into the industry as well.
Absolutely, man. Couldn't agree more with that. And yeah, lead more people into the industry, because maybe if you understand these things better, you understand the process more, you understand why people like it at the same time. You know what I mean? And maybe that does lead to more people getting into video games, and God knows they need it, because they can't hold on to the fucking stuff. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll have to call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerSTOO.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or whatever you get your podcasts, that really, really, really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is Inscryption. Lewis, I've now downloaded it. I had a scare with my Steam Deck where I thought that it wasn't charging. It turned out to be, I think, a faulty socket in my home, but it gave me the fright of my fucking life. So I never got to play it over the weekend when I thought I was going to play it, because I was decorating, and then that happened, and it was a whole mess.
Sounds like life,
I'm going to get right stuck into it this week. That is my plan.
Good stuff. Yeah. I've not gone back to it still yet, because I've just been trying to batter through Nier Automata. But yeah, still looking forward to what you're going to say about it. Give me a shout as soon as you start playing, because I'm keen to get your kind of early impressions.
Oh, I definitely will. The messages will be flying through, I'm sure. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.